Welcome to the Elliott High Network. I'm your host, Trinaya Battle. First, I would like to start off by saying Happy Teacher Appreciation Day. The Washington Teachers Union has launched a major initiative called Learning Doesn't Stop, Lessons on TV. Let's check out our first lesson from Ms. Crump from Cardozo High School, and lesson 2 will be conducted by Mr. Shaw from McKinley Tech Education Campus. Let's see what we can learn today.
Hello, everybody. This is Brandie Crump, instructional coach at Cardozo Education Campus, back again to film yet another high school lesson. This time, we're talking about how to incorporate quotations into your writing. We'll be using the 11th grade assignment, and guess what? It's not just one text or two texts. It is 3 texts. We are going to pull and analyze quotes from Aziz Ansari, Toni Morrison, and Beyonce in order to make our thesis statement stronger. Not too difficult. We're going to do it together. Watch me work. All right, high school, we know that the strongest writing incorporates quotes from credible sources. It makes your argument stronger and really emphasizes what you are trying to say. So we are going to use a strategy called ICE. It's a college level way to introduce your quotations into your writing seamlessly. So the I is introduce your quote. C is cite, so you're citing the quote from whichever source you're using. And then the E, perhaps the most important, you have to explain your quote. ICE, introduce, cite, explain. Let's see what it looks like. For the sake of today, I omitted the question. Remember, we're using 3 different texts about artists taking a stance. So I went ahead and generated a thesis that we're going to use. The thesis: artists use their platform to convey their voice in socially active ways. I'm going to read that again because all of our quotations that we're citing must connect back to this in order to support and prove our argument. Artists use their platform to convey their voice in socially active ways. All right, so going into ICE, our I is our what? Introduce. We're using source 1. According to Aziz Ansari's opening monologue on Saturday Night Live, SNL, he states, "What do you notice about the way that I introduced this quote?" Whose name is in it? Yep, we are using the author's name in this introduction, as well as referencing the text or where he said this quote. And in this case, it's the monologue on Saturday Night Live. But we can't just stop there. We can't just plop in a quote. We have to seamlessly introduce it by saying he states. Got it? All right, so we don't have a quote yet, but we know our C is what? Cite. So let's look at our quote. If you're excited about Trump, great, he's president. Let's hope he does a great job. If you're scared about Trump and you're very worried, you're going to be okay too. Because if you look at our country's history, change doesn't come from presidents. Change comes from large groups of angry people. And if day one is any indication, you are part of the largest group of angry people I have ever seen. What do you notice about this quotation? What type of punctuation is used? Specifically at the beginning and the end. Yep, quotation marks. You can never take somebody else's words to support your argument without putting quotation marks around it. That indicates that you're using someone else's statement to enhance your own writing. One other thing, this quote is a little bit long, but considering that everyone may not have read all 3 of the texts, I wanted to give a little bit of the background information in it so that it makes sense for the purpose of today's lesson. But one rule of thumb that you need to keep in mind, your E or the explanation part should always be just as long, if not longer, than the quote itself. And why is that, Ms. Crump? That is because you want to do the heavy lifting. This is your analysis, your argument. So you're just using that quote to enhance it. But we really need your own words to come in. So before we go to our explanation, let's look at our I and our C together to see if it really is seamless and flows. According to Aziz Ansari's opening monologue on Saturday Night Live, SNL, he states, if you're excited about Trump, great, he's president. Let's hope he does a great job. If you're scared about Trump and you're very worried, you're going to be okay too. Because if you look at our country's history, change doesn't come from presidents. Change comes from large groups of angry people. And if day one is any indication, you are part of the largest group of angry people I have seen. Looks good to me, right? We introduced it. We set it up for our reader or our audience so they know what we're referencing. And then we put the quote there. Can't just plop it. But we're not done. Perhaps the most important part, remember, this is your paper. So we have what letter comes next in our ICE. Yep, we have our E, the explain. So what are we explaining? We're explaining that quote that we just used. Ansari uses humor and wit to charge the people of America. Through his stand-up, he acknowledges that people have mixed feelings about the new president of the United States. Instead of promoting his own stance, he urges people to act. Referencing Americans as angry is his comedic way of reminding people that they too have a voice. He uses his own voice to help others find theirs. All right, so does this appear to be just as long or longer than our quote? Let's go back. Yep, it's about that. The other thing that's important is let's go check our thesis, because a good explanation always connects it back to our thesis. So artists use their platform to convey their voice in socially active ways. So in our explanation, you can see the very bottom of it. He uses his own voice to help others find theirs. He urges people to act. So not only do we explain that quote thoroughly, we also connect it back to our thesis to continue to prove our point to our audience. Let's put it all together. So we have it color coded. Our I, introduce. Our C is cite. And our E, say it with me, explain. All right, let's read it again. According to Aziz Ansari's opening monologue on Saturday Night Live, he states, what is in red? Sorry, introduce. If you're excited about Trump, great, he's president. Let's hope he does a great job. If you're scared about Trump and you're very worried, you're going to be okay too. Because if you look at our country's history, change doesn't come from presidents. Change comes from large groups of angry people. And if day one is any indication, you are part of the largest group of angry people I have ever seen. Ansari uses humor and wit to charge the people of America. Through his stand-up, he acknowledges that people have mixed feelings about the new president of the United States. Instead of promoting his own stance, he urges people to act. Referencing Americans as angry is his comedic way of reminding people that they too have a voice. He uses his own voice to help others find theirs. Okay, I talked about what we have in red, what's in blue, our cite, and what's in this lime green yellowish color. Yep, our explain. All right, so we did that first paragraph together. Now we're going to do an activity using source 2, and I really need your help. So here you have a written text that is not in order. It uses ICE, but not in the correct way. So I'm going to read this, and I want you to follow along. And as I'm reading, look at the quotation. Look at the punctuation and some of the other key clues that you have that helps you to know what part of ICE is which. So let's read it together. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. Morrison does not want Americans to sit and succumb to their circumstances. She reminds them that the only way to ignite change is by standing up for what one believes. No matter how one feels or how difficult things may be, people should not wallow in their sadness. True healing comes when the people speak up. She uses her writing to motivate the masses to action, not despair. Toni Morrison urges her audience in No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear that... Okay, that's what we have. So using ICE, where's our I or our introduction? How do we know whose name and what type of title is in that? Yep, it's here at the very bottom. We see that we reference the author and we also reference the text. So we're setting up our reader to know that, Toni Morrison in this text is about to give us a quote that's helping my argument. So what comes after the introduction? The C, right? We're citing evidence. How do we know that we're citing a quotation mark? A quotation. It always has quotation marks at the beginning of the end. So, yep, if you chose this first part as our cite, you are correct. And lastly, our explanation. Our explanation is longer than our quote. And as you can see, we're interpreting that quote or really going into a deep analysis. So we have ICE. Let's see if we were correct when we put it all together. Yep. So putting it all together, let's read it to make sure it's seamless. Toni Morrison urges her audience in No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear that this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. Morrison does not want Americans to sit and succumb to their circumstances. She reminds them that the only way to ignite change is by standing up for what one believes. No matter how one feels or how difficult things may be, people should not wallow in their sadness. True healing comes when the people speak up. She uses her writing to motivate the masses to action, not despair. Before we move on, though, too, there's one thing that I noticed, right? We're all humans. We all make mistakes. But what is something that we notice about this title? If we're going to also reference the title, we need quotation marks here, and we need quotation marks at the very end. So there should be no place. There should be no place for self-pity, no room for fear, quotation. That tells us that it's a title in there. Got it? All right. Now, this is when you are going to go to work. So the task is you're going to use source 3 and use which method? Yep, ICE. You're going to analyze a quote from the very last text, which is Beyonce's Formation. So we looked at Aziz Ansari's, we looked at Toni Morrison's. You can still do those texts as well because there's an abundance and breadth of good quotations and good words from both of those texts that also will support or go in tandem with your quotation from Beyonce's Formation. And as you can see here, there's quotation marks at the beginning and the end, which indicates or tells our reader that this is a title. All right. To help you, here are a couple introductory phases that are college level phrases. So as you're introducing your quote, you can say according to, as blank explains, blank suggests that, blank observes the following in his or her article, and the text states. But the last thing about the text states, one, you cannot use the text alone until you actually name what the text is, right? Because remember, even though you can never make assumptions about your reader or your audience, you must always assume that they are ignorant to what you're talking about and you have to prove it. So the text states you need to, the first time that you introduce that text, it needs to be the full text with quotation marks around it.
Okay, everybody, we are done. And I told you, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I can guarantee you that if you use that ICE strategy, you will have some of the strongest papers with the most well-developed arguments out there. I really hope this was helpful. I really, really do enjoy making these videos to help you. For this lesson and more like it, be sure to log on to www.wtulocal6.net. Bye. If you have any.
Welcome to Distance Learning, brought to you by the WTU. My name is Mr. Shaw and I teach at McKinley Technology High School, and today we're going to be doing a World History and Geography 1 lesson on the Atlantic slave trade. So let's get started with our lesson for today, which we're going to be thinking like a historian, perspectives on the African slave trade. So, ninth graders in DCPS, you should be around the age of exploration and moving into the Atlantic slave trade at this time. So our objective for today is students will be able to identify the role slavery played in African societies before the transatlantic slave trade began and describe the effect of European involvement by soapsing primary source documents in order to write a short essay analyzing the nature of the slave trade along the African coast. And our essential questions today are, what was the nature of the slave trade along the African coast? What were the different roles that Europeans and Africans played in the slave trade along the African coast? So let's begin by looking at analyzing primary sources, sourcing. So today, as I said in our objective, we're going to be soapsing primary source documents. So what is soapsing? And maybe some of you already know this, or in your English classes, you might have heard it referred to as soapstone. But in history, I like to leave off the T and just use soaps. So let's begin. What is a primary source? So a primary source, a piece of evidence created during the time period being discussed or created by someone who experienced the period firsthand. So all of the documents that we're going to be looking at today on perspectives on the slave trade are going to be primary source documents, which means they are all going to be from that time period. So a primary source can be a book, a letter, a diary, a painting, a statue, an accounting ledger, a building, any cultural artifact. So when you analyze a primary source, there are two main things you'll need to analyze: sourcing and content. In this lesson today, we're going to be focusing on sourcing. And so the term sourcing means uncovering all of the background information you need in order to understand the source. So who created the primary source and what is their point of view on the subject matter? Are they a credible source or likely to be biased? What is the purpose of the source? What is the historical situation underlying the source? Who is the audience? So the point of gathering this background information is to see how it might inform or even skew the content of the source. On an even more practical level, sourcing your evidence when you write helps readers know where the evidence comes from, what to take into account as they read it. This usually takes the form of a sentence or two that precedes the evidence, called a sourcing statement. And here you can see this map, which is showing us sources of slaves along the coast of West Africa. So let's take a moment to make sure that you understand all of the aspects of sourcing. So we have point of view, the specific viewpoint of the creator of the source, as influenced by their beliefs, position, historical situation, or other factors. And then you have purpose. What is the creator of the source hoping to accomplish? And then you have audience, who is being addressed by the creator of the source. And then you have historical situation, how the time, place, culture, and other factors influence the creation of the source. And then we have credibility, how believable a source is and what limitations it might have in terms of its point of view. So let's break this down and make this really easier to understand. And so for my students, we use the acronym SOAPS. So we talk about who is the speaker, what is the occasion, who is the audience,
what is the purpose, and then what is the subject. So let's look at these a little bit more. Let's dissect the acronym SOAPS. So, who is the speaker? The voice that is telling the story. What is the occasion? The time and place of the piece, the context that prompted the writing. Who is the audience, the group or readers to whom this piece is directed? What is the purpose, the reason behind the text? And then what is the subject? Students should be able to state the subject in a few words or phrases. And you can see here this image of the African slave trade. So here just breaks this down for you a little bit more about what SOAPS is. And you can take a look at this slide a little bit longer and pause the video and read over a little bit more about speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, and subject if you need some more background. So the documents that we're going to be looking at today are on the African slave trade. But if you need more background information, so some more secondary source, there's this text here that you will have on the African slave trade, which will be with the materials on the WTU site that you can use. You can read it over before you go into the documents. So let's jump into thinking like a historian, perspectives on the African slave trade. So before enslaved Africans began their horrific middle passage across the Atlantic, they were captured by African slavers in the interior and then traded to European merchants and slave ship captains along the coast. Some African kingdoms, such as Benin or initially the Congo, made enormous profits from the slave trade, while other societies, such as the Igbo, were the unfortunate victims. And you can see here in this chart the estimated slave imports by destination. So let's begin with modeling SOAPs. So let's look at a document here. This is our first document, and we're going to SOAPs this document. So let's read over the document first and then look at some key information that we should find in order to SOAPs the document. So this is Nzinga Mbeda, who is also known as Afonso I, letter to the King of Portugal on July 6, 1526. And the background tells us that Portuguese priests brought Christianity to the Kingdom of the Congo in 1491, and King Afonso I, who ruled from 1509 to 1543 of the Congo, and the entire royal family converted. Nevertheless, slavery had existed in the Congo before the Portuguese arrived. King Afonso I initially profited from the transatlantic slave trade, but by the 1520s, the trade threatened the kingdom's survival. Here, Afonso begs the Portuguese king, João VI, to halt the trade. So that gives us some background on the document. So let's look at the document itself right now. So this is July 6, 1526. To Dam Hao, king, our brother. Sir, your highness should know how our kingdom is being lost, caused by the excessive freedom given by your factors and officials, aka the king's ministers, his people that he's sent there, and merchants who are allowed to come to this kingdom. And we cannot reckon how great the damage is, since the mentioned merchants are taking every day our natives. They grab them and get them to be sold, and our country is being completely depopulated, so less people in the country. We beg of your highness to help and assist us in this matter, because it is our will that in these kingdoms there should not be any trade of slaves nor outlet for them. Otherwise, we cannot remedy such an obvious damage. Pray our Lord in his mercy to have your highness under his guard. I kiss your hands many times. At the town of Congo, the Kingdom of Afonso. So let's take a look at some important things that we should be picking out of this text in order to effectively do our sourcing. So we can begin by looking here, and you can see on your screen where I have boxed these important information, and you want to do this too with your text. So we know that this is from Afonso I to the King of Portugal, and this is July 6, 1526. We know that by the 1520s, the trade threatened the Kingdom of Congo's survival. And we see here that Afonso is begging the Portuguese king, João VI, to halt the trade. And so when we look into the text further, we see that he's saying, we're being lost here. The cause of this is obviously he's putting this on the King of Portugal and his men that he sent there. He says, we cannot reckon the great damage, right, that is taking place. More and more natives are being taken. And he says, our country is being completely depopulated. So they're taking so many people that the population is dropping. So let's take a look then at what this would look like if we're going to SOAPS this document. So the speaker, we obviously know, is Nzinga Mbeda, or Afonso I, and we know that he is king of the Congo and he ruled from 1509 to 1543. That is important that you add that in there. Then we know that the occasion is July 6, 1526. And the slave trade is threatening the kingdom's survival, which is why he's writing this. The audience is the King of Portugal at that time, João VI, and then also maybe the Portuguese people involved in the slave trade. The purpose here is that the King Afonso, or his African name, Nzinga Mbeda, is decrying the rapid destabilization of his kingdom as the Portuguese slave traders intensify their efforts. And then we also, the subject is the activity of the Portuguese slave traders in the Congo. So really quickly now, we are going to take a look at some other documents here. So document 2, document 3, document 4, document 5, document 5. And then we are going to look at these questions here for us to analyze. And then you'll write your essay. So then you have the Thinking Like a Historian handout, which you have on the WTU site. We already did the first document. Then you're going to do this other documents, and these charts are provided for you. And then again, if you need this text here, you can go ahead and find it on the WTU website to give you background. So thank you for tuning in. All lesson materials can be found on the WTU website, along with additional texts on the Atlantic slave trade. Have a good one.